What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Bubbles BuzzerBeater, your unofficial official BuzzerBeater YouTube channel. I hope the beginning of the season has been good for all of you and has treated you well. I know we are getting into the actual what feels like good portion of the season where, players are starting to get into better game shape. Hopefully you're not playing as many bots in like cup games and stuff, but I hope the season has gone well so far. Today I just wanted to talk about potential a little bit and discuss the sub-levels of potential. I know a lot of people may or may not be aware of how sub-levels and potential work exactly, so I'll briefly talk about how potentials and BuzzerBeater work. And then I also wanted to go through some of the crazier examples that I've seen on the transfer list in the last few weeks and just point out some players where it looks like they had their potential stretched to the max or surpassed what you kind of expected. So I'll go over briefly what potential looks like and then go over some of these fun examples. And then if you guys have any players that kind of meet this criteria, please feel free to comment down below and let me know, hey, I have an all-star player who reached this many total skill points and I wasn't expecting it, or I have a superstar potential player that hit 100K salary, or I'm sure some of you guys have some players that surpass the ones that I'll showcase, as these are just ones that are on the transfer list, but they're definitely very interesting case studies. So first of all, as I said, BuzzerBeater and potential is very interesting because some people might not know that potentials actually have sublevels. So sublevels are the decimal point values of your player. Potential has sublevels as well as other skills in BuzzerBeater. However, potential isn't like, free throws or jump shot or rebounding or anything else where it can't be raised or popped like other attributes in BuzzerBeater. It's just the set mark when they spawn, and that's kind of what it is. So the potential sublevels are hidden, obviously, so you don't know exactly what that player's sublevel is at. However, they are still shown in the main tiers, so as soon as they hit that cutoff for Superstar versus MVP versus Hall of Famer, as soon as they reach that lowest mark possible to reach the next tier, you can see what they're listed as, but you won't necessarily know if they're on the lower end, higher end, or kind of mid-level for that potential tier. And then for potential, it works as like a soft cap. So let's say, for example, a player has superstar potential and like 8.66 is what their potential sublevel is. As soon as that player reaches 8.66, the potential works as a soft cap and their training will start to slow down dramatically once that cap is hit. So yes, you can train them past that point, and it looks like some of these players that I'll showcase have been trained past that point, but the training does slow down pretty dramatically and it's not recommended to train them past that point. So now just for an example to kind of go a little bit deeper and hopefully help a lot of you understand a little bit better, these are 4 players that I have on my team right now. So you can see Dowell, Rudd, Bridges, and Beatty. You can see 3 of them are MVP potential level players, and then 1 is a superstar, so technically 1 level down below. I obviously don't know the exact potential sublevels for these players, but just for example's sake, I have Dowell listed as a 9.92 potential player, so very much so the high-end version of a MVP potential player. You can see he's essentially 0.08 away from a Hall of Famer, and then 0.93 away from Superstar, so he's a high-end MVP potential player. And then you can see Rudd, who's more of the low-end, so even though he's MVP player potential and he hit that threshold to be labeled as MVP, he's just a 9.04 potential player. And then down below Bridges, he's listed as a superstar, but if he's on the high end, for example, of superstar, and is like an 8.96, where he doesn't quite meet the threshold to be considered an MVP level player for potential, he's still very, very close to Rudd. So some people might look at Bridges and Rudd and say, oh, well, you definitely want Rudd because his potential is going to be a lot higher. Yes, that can be the case, but it's not always how it works exactly. So in this situation, you can see they're actually only 0.08 away from each other, and Bridges is 0.04 away from being an MVP himself. So there are situations where, even though the thresholds are different for the players and they're listed in different categories, sometimes they're a lot closer than you might think. And then Beatty's going to be that standard, just mid-level potential MVP. You can see 9.51 is what I have him listed as, just for an example. But that gives you a good kind of concept of players being high-end and closer to the next tier, players being low-end and being closer to the bottom tier below them, and then just kind of the mid-level tiers. So getting into the potential players that I found on the transfer list that I thought were interesting cases and players that have definitely surpassed the potential you would think or the skill levels you would kind of peg with them. For full potential or starter potential, this is just the first one where a couple interesting players. You can see 87 total skill points on that top player right there. Not necessarily like the most beautiful build ever, kind of a wonky one, but he was able to reach essentially 15K in salary, so definitely a stretch right there for him. And then the bottom case is just funny because he essentially only got handling and driving, but it is interesting to see a starter potential player get 23 handling, 20 driving, and 23 experience. So 92 skill points right there, and seeing a legendary 23 on a starter potential player is always a fun little thing. As for the next one, so 5 potential or star, this is where you're getting into a little bit more higher salary players, similar to the starter potential players. There is that small forward down at the bottom who's a 20K salary player for a star, which is pretty high. And it looks like they just got like 1v1 forward spam, 16 jump shot, 18 handling, 19 driving, 12 inside shot, but 104 total skill points on a star is pretty incredible. And then also looking at the top one where there's a very capable big right there who reached essentially 35K salary with star potential. Moving on to the next one, all-star potential. So this is where you're getting into players who a lot of countries will have all-star level players actually be able to compete for like U21, where they're not necessarily who you want, but there are cases where all-stars do carry enough potential due to the sub-level, where they're closer to like a perennial all-star and can actually reach higher salaries and higher skills. So the top example right there, a 66K salary player on just all-star potential, that is definitely higher than I think most people expect. And even 54 big skill points on an all-star is pretty incredible. And then as for the bottom player, 118 total skill points on an all-star. I don't know if I've personally seen an all-star with higher total skill points than that. So if you do have a player on your team and would be willing to share them, let me know if you have an all-star with more than 118 total skill points, because that is an incredible build for the potential that he was spawned with, and he is definitely closer to that perennial all-star tier. Moving on to the next one, the 7 potential perennial all-stars. So you can see the top one right there is just going to be 104K salary, very, very high, and also 20 inside defense. So I don't think there's many players in the game who would ever have 20 inside defense and 100K salary plus with perennial all-star potential. So he's definitely been stretched to the max. You can see the atrocious jump shot and jump range, but all the other skills are kind of there, and he could definitely be a defensive force for you, even in like Division 1 in some leagues. So pretty good right there. And then the bottom example, looking at 132 total skill points, 16 outside defense, 14 inside defense. Is a very good all-around player. Can essentially play like 1 through 3 for you. Perennial all-star potential, but 65K salary, 132 skill points is really good for a perennial all-star. Now for 8 potential players, the superstars. This is where I'm like, my U21 vibes are going off right now, because you can see the top player right there, who I'm going to guess was a U21 player at some point, but he's essentially just been trained in big skills only. Superstar potential, 7'3", but hit 138K salary, so he's very, very close to MVP potential, because not very often will you see superstars be able to get above 100K, 110K, let alone 138K. So 61 big skill points right there for superstar potential. Very, very nice. And then the bottom example, 19 outside defense, 16 inside defense, 136 total skill points. People are always afraid to kind of draft the perennial all-star superstar potential players because they're worried about, if they'll be able to train them to the point that they need for upper leagues. This is an example where, his sub-level is definitely high enough where you could use him and train him up to a point where he is usable in higher leagues. So, and then the last one is just going to be the MVP potential. I won't talk about like Hall of Famers or all-time greats just because, a lot of those you don't really know what the next tier looks like, so there's not anything to compare it to. But for the MVPs, these are players who are definitely on the higher sub-level end for MVPs and are essentially Hall of Famers in the way that you can view them. So the bottom example right there, 64 big skill points on an MVP, 200K salary, very, very high. He could even be a fringe national team player for some countries, depending on how big the country is. But 64 big skill points, 97 total skill points, that 19 inside shot, and then 200K salary on an MVP. And then even the top player. So the top player, this is one of the better MVPs that I've seen on the transfer list as of recently. I know there's a couple USA MVP players, and I know I've seen some in the past who have had higher total skill points. I've seen like 155, 156 total skill points for MVPs, but this is a player that was on the transfer list when I was looking, and he is incredible. This is a player that very well could make the national team for a lot of nations. My guess is he was probably trained slightly past the cap, but he was able to reach 202K salary, 153 total skill points. So once again, just kind of showing how the potentials can sometimes scare people off as to, I don't want this potential level player because I'm afraid they might be on the lower side of the sub-level, but there are these situations where they are on the upper side of the sub-level as well, and then can be essentially trained as a Hall of Famer if they're an MVP potential player. That's going to do it for this video, and just kind of the players that I've found on the transfer list that I thought were maxed out and kind of crazy looking based on their potential. But who is the craziest maxed out potential player that you have on your team right now? Let me know down below, and as always guys, thanks for listening.